Good evening. Answer me this question. If you were to take a test and you scored 11%, what would that mean? Generally, it means you failed. Now, if you were to get a review by your employer and your employer said that you were 11% successful at all your objectives, what would that mean? That means you would get fired. And if your doctor said you had an 11% chance of survival, what would you do? You'd start praying. So answer this. Why are we sending the same people back to Congress? You're watching Access to Justice, and I'm attorney Delia Parker Mims. We are in the middle of the election season, and Access to Justice is going to jump right in it. We're going to talk about progressive issues with progressive policies, progressive solutions, and we're going to talk to progressive candidates. And today, we're going to talk with Jan McDowell. She is a candidate for U.S. Congressional District 24, and she's running against Ken Marchant. Is that who you're running against, the incumbent?
Kenny Marchant, I believe is how he pronounces it.
Kenny Marchant, okay. And so you're running to take that seat. Today we're going to talk with Jan, and we're going to find out who is Jan, why is she running, and then we're going to talk about some progressive issues. Thank you for coming today, Jan.
Good morning, Delia, and thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I'm excited to have you here and talk about progressive issues on Access to Justice, because that's what we are promoting. And I know that you have stepped out there into the race, and you're going to run for the 24th district.
That's right.
What district does that entail?
District 24 includes a little bit of southern Denton County, as well as a big chunk of northwest Dallas County and northeastern Tarrant County.
Okay. So would that be the part about South Lake?
South Lake and Colleyville and Hurst, Euless, Bedford, a lot of Irving, Capel, Carrollton, Farmers Branch. Those are the kind of the big areas. Little bits of Dallas and Fort Worth thrown in for good measure.
Okay. Now you're running against the incumbent who's been in office for how many years?
He is coming up on 12 years. He's running for his 7th term.
Okay. And has he been running unopposed previously?
I know at least some of the times he's had opponents. I'm not sure if he has every time or not.
But the key thing is this is his 7th term. So let's talk about Jan, and let's talk about what are some of your views, who you are, introduce yourself to the viewers so we can talk about progressive issues on Access to Justice. So introduce yourself to the county, Jan.
Okay. I am a reality-based idealist, I think would be a short version of telling you who I am. The idealism comes in believing that every person should be respected for their inherent worth and dignity. Every person should have the opportunity to reach their full potential, which would benefit not only them, but society as a whole. The realistic part is based on the fact that I am a CPA. I understand the revenues, the expenses, the budgets, the financial pieces that go into making a program work or not work.
Okay. And I think that's really important, particularly to our viewers, the fact that you have a background in accounting. So
Right.
you're based in reality, so you know what it means to propose something and then have to be able to figure out how to come back and pay for it. Is that correct?
Right, and to discuss the various pieces of why something might or might not work, or how it can be made better to work better.
Okay. Now, before we really get into some of those issues, because I think you have a lot of great positions that we want to talk about, let's go a little bit further back and introduce the viewers as to who you are and where you come from. You're not new to Texas.
Oh, absolutely not. I've lived here since I was 8 years old. I grew up in Richardson, graduated from Richardson High School, went to Texas Tech, where I actually majored in journalism and public relations. So when I decided to morph into becoming a CPA, I like to say I became one of those people who can both do numbers and communicate with people. So I think I can try to make things understandable for people who don't get all the accounting stuff.
Right. It is kind of thought of as accountants are a little bit more to themselves and reserved, but that PR background of yours, I'm sure, certainly has helped you in that process of being a little bit different.
Right.
So where do you currently live right now?
I live in Carrollton, in the Denton County portion of Carrollton, and I've lived there since 1979. So I am absolutely not a newcomer to the district.
Now, you are a Red Raider, right? Is that what Texas Tech is?
Yes, absolutely.
And as the viewers know, I'm an SMU Mustang, but
Okay.
you know, it's all good. We're all part of
Absolutely.
Texas. It's the Texas family. So that's great. Now, we're going to get into some of those issues. One thing I liked about what I saw in your campaign is you said we're all together, we're better. And then you talked about how you're pro-choice, but then you said, what does that really mean? I'm not just pro-choice, I'm pro-living. And how we can't just be concerned with whether or not the pro-choice or pro-life issue, but once we're here, the quality of life of everyone.
That's exactly right, Delia. I am definitely pro-choice when it comes to women's reproductive health, a woman's right to make her own decisions concerning her body, feeling free to think what she thinks, consult her family, her doctor, her church, whoever she wants, but not the government. The government doesn't have a role there. However, the people who call themselves pro-life are very much engaged with that decision around abortion, and then once a baby's born, they lose interest in that baby. That's where I become strongly pro-life. I'm pro-life for all the things that happen after that baby is born, for education, for our planet and environment, so that that baby has a planet to grow up on and live in. Education.
And it seems like there is some common denominator that you're speaking about in terms of being pro-life. For instance, you talk about you care about the baby once they're born. Well, that would seem to be a concern of a pro-life proponent as well.
I think so.
So when we talk about the issues such as health care and reproductive rights, or a woman's right to have access to health care, certainly through their insurance, it seems to be that we should be able to have some common ground in that area, being pro-life and wanting to support birth control. Wouldn't you agree?
Right. To me, when I think of the people who call themselves pro-life as really just being anti-abortion, and I would agree that nobody is pro-abortion. I think the best policy as far as abortion is to make it safe, legal, and rare. And the only way to tackle making it rare is to provide easy access to birth control and to comprehensive sex education. So when people who say they're pro-life say then they want to defund Planned Parenthood, for example, those are the very things that Planned Parenthood promotes, the delivering easy access to birth control and sex education. To shut that down, there's no logic there if you want to try to prevent future abortions.
Right, and I think, and what we want to do here on Access to Justice is create a dialogue, because we don't want to send Jan to Congress where we're not able to talk to each other. We definitely want to send her to Congress, but we don't want it to be like it is now, where neither side of the aisle is willing to listen. And it's the dialogue that is important. Now, what I like about what you just said is, I think that you have just illustrated much common ground between lots of people who would identify as pro-life. And when we open that dialogue, and as you stated, nobody's pro-abortion.
Correct.
But let's talk about what we really are against. Maybe we're against teen pregnancy, or we're against unwanted pregnancies. So what can we do to solve those things? And that's kind of what I'm hearing you saying. Let's talk about birth control. Let's talk about education, so that we can all meet that common ground where we don't have any unexpected or unwanted pregnancies. because ultimately that's the value that we all support.
I agree totally. That's exactly where I like to say that I'm pro-life. I'm just for life in all its stages. Yeah.
Okay, so that's one issue that separates Jan possibly from the masses, but really the ability to talk about those issues, create that dialogue, and realize we all have common ground. Underneath it all, there's a value that we all value, and that would be perhaps not having teen pregnancies or unwanted pregnancies. So let's talk about how we can reach those solutions with progressive TV and progressive candidates and progressive conversations. All right, now there were some other issues that you highlighted in your position papers that I read, and you mentioned seniors and paid time off. That also goes into your issue of being pro-life and the quality of life. Tell us something about that.
Right. Seniors are obviously a vital part of the fabric of our country. They've contributed so much, and they continue to contribute so much. I have many friends who are well into the years we term senior, and they are just a delight to talk to. They are smart, they're engaged, they're contributing in many, many ways. The idea that Social Security would ever be curtailed is just not a viable option.
Well, now you're an accountant, and some of the ideas or the positions that are out there would be that those type of benefits are dragging down our economy or dragging down the budget. In reality, they only represent about 15% of our overall spending. How do you address those types of concerns when people feel that providing a quality of life to our seniors or our disabled citizens is a drag on the economy?
Well, I need to jump to a different topic you haven't gotten to yet about taxes in general. I believe that our current system has two types of income. There's ordinary income and there's capital gains income. And we can talk about that further down the line if you like. But capital gains income is the income that most wealthy people make most of their income on. That income isn't taxed for Social Security or Medicare. And if it were, I think that the Social Security and Medicare systems would have plenty of money to cover the obligations that we've taken on for our seniors to keep them viable and living their vibrant lives.
Well, there's a saying that the true measure of a society is how it treats its most vulnerable. And that's kind of what we're talking about. Now, you brought up a good point, and I want to delve into it a little bit more and bring it more clear. Now, I was an economics major many years ago, and you talked about capital gains and how that portion of income is not taxed. So a lot of times in the rhetoric that we hear, it's we don't like rich, or we don't like rich people, and we are going after the rich and people who aren't working. You know, that type of vitriol language that we have pitting working people against other working people.
Right.
Let's break down what you said, because I think that's very important to understand. Capital gains. You're talking about the interest that people are making, are living off of, because they have, let's say you have $1 million. And the interest that develops, would that be considered the capital gains?
No, actually, interest is ordinary income. If I can kind of back up a little bit, ordinary income is the income you get on your paycheck from working hard at your job, or the profit that you make if you own your own business. That's all ordinary income, and it's taxed at ordinary tax rates. Capital gains income, I've heard referred to as mailbox money. You go out to your mailbox, there's a check there. It's the dividends that come from your investments, or the sales when your broker buys and sells stocks and you make money on that. And it is called capital gains income. It's taxed at a much lower rate. Every time you hear any discussion of let's work on our tax policy and revamp our tax system, the first thing you hear is we need to cut the capital gains rate. Well, no, I don't think so. I think it's preposterous to think that there are two kinds of income. In my mind, income is income.
Okay.
And all the income should play by the same rules.
And I think that is a great way of explaining it. Income is income, and it's not as a simple interest in going after the rich or not
Right.
letting people who aren't
Right.
contributing in it. It's simply saying let's tax all income
Yeah.
that's earned.
And there's nothing bad about capital gains income or the people who earn that. That's very important work that they do, investing in businesses. It's all good income. But to then say that we're trying to redistribute wealth or target the rich, no, we're trying to undo the redistribution that's been done for all these years, making it so much easier on the wealthy. That's where you get Warren Buffett saying that his secretary pays taxes at a higher rate than he does, because she does. It's
Yes.
she
And
has
I read
earned it.
somewhere, it might have been in one of your papers, that 3% of the people in the country own 50% of the wealth. Was that something I
That
read there?
wasn't from mine. I don't
Okay.
have those numbers. I know they're pretty startling, though, whatever.
Right. But when you think about it, 3% of the people in the country that own 50%.
Yeah, something's
the
not
wealth.
right there. And I don't by any means think that everything should be even. I think everybody should have an even opportunity, and I think everybody's income should be treated the same way.
Okay. All right, so we've talked about seniors, your stance on that and the importance of caring for our seniors, how we can finance that. That CPA background of yours came into play, which is important, because keeping those numbers straight when we're in Congress is something that all of us are looking at when we're back at home wondering what's going on over there.
Right.
Now let's talk about some other things. Let's say paid time off. What do you mean by that when you presented that in one of your positions?
I think that any person who has a full-time job needs to be able to earn a living wage at that and provide a good life for themselves and their families. Everybody needs time off. People need paid sick leave. They need to be able to anticipate normal raises as the business progresses. When productivity rates go up and the business makes more money, the people who produce that productivity should share in the rewards from what they produced, and not just going to the people who own the business.
When I was studying economics, one thing I read about the difference economy between Japan and the United States was their upper executives did not make hundreds of times more than the person who was on the assembly line. And
That's
that
kind of
was-
the Ben and Jerry's model. I think they started out with a cap of 7 times. The highest paid person couldn't make more than 7 times the lowest paid person. And we have so totally blown that out of the water. I don't have a projected or any number in mind for that kind of thing, but the more that the income inequality gap grows and grows and grows, and the only thing that Republicans seem to suggest is lower the capital gains rate, which just makes that gap bigger.
Would that be along the lines of the trickle-down theory from Reagan that has never been proven to be successful?
Yes, a business does not say to themselves at their board meeting, we just got a tax break. I think we should go hire more people because of our tax break. No, the reason a business hires people is because there's more business being done than what their current workforce can manage, so they need more people. So if people who would shop at your store and use your products and services have the money to afford it, then yes, your business is going to get busier. You're going to be able to hire more people. Everybody's going to benefit. The owners will profit. It all works, and altogether we're better.
Yeah. And perhaps if we had more dialogue and talked about the income gap, the disparity between the middle class, the disappearing middle class, the ever growing poverty line, and the difference between the higher levels of income, we would find that we did have more common ground with each other.
Absolutely.
If you are a middle class Republican, you probably would want to have that conversation and learn from someone who's a CPA as to what does that really mean when we're talking about taxing the capital gains tax.
Can I give an example
Sure.
that I like? If you're playing a game of Monopoly, the decision is at the beginning of the game, okay, the first person to get a hotel on any one of their properties gets to make a change in the rules. I'm the first person with a hotel, so my new rule is every time I land on one of your properties, you don't have a hotel, you have to pay me double what the rent is on my little property card. But if I land on one of your properties, I only have to pay you half as much because you don't have any hotels. That's pretty much what's been happening. The people in Congress are doing this ever pressing need to cut capital gains. That benefits them, it benefits their wealthy donors, and it sounds good. We're going to revamp and reform our tax system, and we're going to cut the capital gains rate. It does nothing for the average American.
Okay. Now, you're running against Kitty Merchant, who's been in since 2003. When I looked online at how many representatives we've had out of this district, we've only had 3. And that's been since 1973 when this district sort of was created, because the representative before him, it was revamped,
Redistricted. Like maybe gerrymandered a little.
And that's a whole conversation there. And that was when Martin Frost was in that. After it was redistricted, then he lost his election. Let's talk about the idea that people run for Congress and get a lifetime appointment, and at that point are more comfortable being in that position, more comfortable giving themselves raises, and yet shutting down the economy. What can we do about that?
I think that a lot of that goes to campaign financing. If your yardstick for every vote you take in Congress is how is this going to impact my wealthy campaign donors, I don't think that's a valid North Star to follow. My inclination would be to follow more of the altogether we're better type of thing and figure out on each issue pending before Congress, is this going to help most of the people in the country or in District 24, or is it just going to benefit the top few? And my vote would be with the many, not with the few. So term limits might be a good idea. I'm not huge, I'm not way invested in pursuing term limits. I think if a Congress member is not really accomplishing much, then yeah, I think that the idea that this is a lifetime job is very misguided.
Right. And term limits, the arguments they have, it has its pros, it has its cons. If you've been in Congress for a while, that kind of gives you a bit more seasoned, savvy way of being able to approach things and get things accomplished. On the other hand, having fresh ideas, not being tied or married to donors, also gives you the freedom to look at things differently. But what I think is important is being able to have the dialogue, being able to talk about it, breaking that gridlock and saying, what is the common ground that we all have on both parties? And that's what we want to do here today on Access to Justice and as we go through the political season. And I think that you have enumerated many things that may, on the surface, come across as simply a democratic ideal. But as we delve into it and discuss it, there's much common ground to be made with Republicans and people on the other side of that bridge. With your pro-life stance, let's talk about what our common ground is. Not having unwanted pregnancies. So perhaps we should talk about those things that affect that. And so I'm really excited to be able to talk with you about that and open that dialogue. There were a few other things that I think you were interested in that I believe the audience would find interesting to know about you. So let's talk about some of those. You're into reducing fossil fuels.
Yeah, I think that our planet is too important to risk on profit motives. The fossil fuels industry has not shown the restraint that is needed to keep our planet safe. And we have only to look at the housing and banking and other industries that tried to take us and came pretty close to taking us right off the cliff, to know that it's not a good position to just think, well, surely they won't go that far. Surely they, have some kind of ethical or smart scientific basis for what they're doing. But as we've seen in the past, I don't think that's a safe thing to assume. I think if there's profit to be made, the industries will be there for the profit, and somebody needs to stand up for the planet.
All right. Well, Jan, we're getting to that part where all of my guests get an opportunity to have what I call a closing statement, and then I will conclude our show with a final statement. I do want to thank you for coming out and spending time with us so that you can be introduced to the public and we can open the dialogue about the many things that we really do have common ground with. Ultimately, we're all in this together and we're all better together, as your campaign slogan puts it. So I'm going to let you talk with the audience and tell them a little bit something about yourself and things that you might think are important.
Well, thank you again, Delia, and thanks to all of you watching. Yes, I do believe that all together we're better. I think that there's way too much emphasis on red and blue, conservative and liberal, Republican and Democrat. And the dialogue, as Delia kept saying, is the important thing. I don't think that a Congress member should be able to look at, theoretically, hypothetically, all the bills coming up before the session and already know that they're going to be for all the ones with one color flag and against all the ones with another color flag. I would approach each issue with the yardstick of all together we're better.
And Jen, that is what separates you from others that might be running, and I really appreciate that you brought that conversation to us today so that we can talk about it and open it. Now, I'm going to conclude on what we call the final statement. Sometimes it's final argument when I'm in court, but I like to be a little bit more friendly and simply say the final statement. It was a great opportunity to speak with Jan McDowell today, who is running for U.S. Congressional District 24. All together we're better is her campaign slogan, and when you think about it, really, that's what we all really need to be concentrating on and think about. Now, if 11% is a number that suggests failure in any category, then we ought to consider, why are we sending the same people back to Congress who have an 11% approval rating, sometimes maybe a point or two higher? We are actually the ones who make that decision. And so let's open the dialogue. Let us talk about things and find that common ground and send people to Congress who are willing to have that conversation. Some important dates you need to remember is that October 11th is the deadline to register to vote. And you can't complain if you don't vote, and you don't want to boo. If you don't boo, vote, right? That's what we want to move forward. And also remember that early voting begins October 24th through November 4th. And I would encourage everyone to early vote because it's the easiest way to do things. To get in, you can early vote at any place in your county if you vote during that early voting. And of course, our general election is November 8th. And for Access to Justice, I'm Attorney Delia Parker Mims. Thank you, Jan McDowell, for coming and speaking with us.
Thank you.